Hey guys, Peter Franson here from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. Okay, I can't believe I've never made a video like this before, but I've talked about this some on the podcast before, so some of these things I'm going to share might sound a little familiar if you've been listening to the podcast for a number of years, but anyway, I wanted to kind of refresh my list of my favorite geek Christmas movies and shows, or maybe I should say the ones that I tend to watch from year to year that are kind of part of my tradition. And I want to kind of define my terms a little bit. By geek, I mean something that has something of the fantastical in it, something of the unrealistic in it. So it's got to be sci-fi, fantasy, horror, superhero, stuff like that. So in other words, the grandfather of unconventional, grown-up, non-family friendly Christmas movies, Die Hard, is not going to be on a list like this because, well, John McClane doesn't have lasers coming out of his fingers. If he had lasers coming out of his fingers, maybe that movie would make this list. Great movie for Christmas time, but not into the kind of like the channel that I'm focusing on right here. So you're not going to see that on this list or other movies like it. And then by Christmas, in the past, when there were fewer Christmas movies with strong geek appeal, I would qualify anything that had any remote little teeny element of Christmas in it, like in Prometheus. There's briefly a scene where they put a Christmas tree on the table and say, hey, it's Christmas, and then they move on from that. That used to qualify in my mind as, okay, that's a Christmas geek movie, I'm watching that every year. But over time, as what was once consigned only to geeks became much more part of the mainstream, we have more quote-unquote geek movies that have strong Christmas elements to choose from. And so I'm really on this list focusing on stuff that has really strong, overt Christmas elements in it, as well as really strong geek appeal and geek elements in it. So, and it's both movies and shows. I think just 2 shows and 3 movies. It ended up being kind of a top 5, I guess, but I'm only going to present them in alphabetical order, not in any kind of ranking. And first, I want to do some honorable mentions. Shazam needs to be on this list. That's not like a movie that I really super love, but I do enjoy it for what it is, and it's got a whole lot of Christmas going on in that movie. I may still watch it this year. Since it's come out, I think prior to this year, I've put it on every year, but I haven't yet this year, so it remains to be seen if I'll get around to it, but definitely fits the category of a geek movie that I enjoy, and has a lot of Christmas stuff going on in the backdrop of it. Also, shout out to Batman the Animated Series Season 1, Christmas with the Joker. This was, I think, maybe one of the first episodes to air that season, if not the first. And I find the plot a little bit cheesy, and Joker isn't treated as a real, true threat as much as I'd like him to be, or at least as sadistically and darkly as he is in some other episodes of the animated series. And so, I mean, for several reasons, it's not really jumps out to me as a really strong episode, but it's got a whole bunch of Christmas going on, and I've watched it many years. In fact, I usually watch it every year as well. It's just not on my main list of 5 here. And then also Volume 4. I'm not sure what season it's in, but on the DVD releases, it's in Volume 4 of Batman the Animated Series, an episode called Holiday Nights, which is kind of an anthology of short stories and that make up a single episode. And really, it's just the final conversation between Batman and Commissioner Gordon at the diner that I really like and find kind of sweet. So anyway, those are my honorable mentions. But getting into the list now in alphabetical order. First up, I have to say Batman Returns, and this is the movie that's been on this list the longest. Before I even started making a list, I was just watching Batman Returns as kind of Pater's Christmas movie that he would watch every year. The setting is very strongly in the Christmas season in Gotham City. Even Danny Elfman's score has like some sleigh bells and other elements that almost make the score not like at a Home Alone level of something you can just listen to during the Christmas season, but pretty close, I think. And yeah, it's every year I either watch the movie or I watch the commentary by the director, just while I'm baking or doing other stuff. So it's one or the other every year. I think pretty much without fail, this thing gets put on. It's an interesting movie to go back to as a Batman fan. I mean, a lot of people made a big deal out of in the Zack Snyder Batman versus Superman movie. Batman doesn't kill. I'm like, okay, where were you when Batman Returns was, oh, you probably weren't born yet. This is probably the answer to that. But I mean, Batman totally kills in these movies. The Michael Keaton Batman kills. So, I mean, like in Batman Returns alone, he torched a dude with the Batmobile's turbine jet, and you know that he wasn't expecting that guy to live. And then also he puts a guy's own bomb on his chest, and knowingly to kill him. And you see the guy kind of blow up off screen, as it were. So, I also find that the dialogue is way too clever and punchliney. I think they were trying to make these characters as funny and interesting as the Joker, but they can be interesting in different ways without being funny. And I don't think the writers really kind of recognized how to play to the strengths of Penguin and Catwoman. The feminism theme is laid on really, really thick. I mean, if you think that left-leaning movie scripts can be preachy today, go back and watch this one. And, maybe it's not as grating on some people's nerves as other left-leaning messaging in movies today, but it is painted on really thick in this movie. And I think it's painted on too thick, even though I think there are some good things about certain forms of feminism. Yeah, man, they really lay it on thick. And I also prefer Catwoman as a logically skilled cat burglar, where there's an explanation for how she got her skills. I have to kind of come up with some headcanon and cock my head to the side in a funny way to make sense of Selina Kyle suddenly, because she had a psychological break, becoming someone that can go toe-to-toe with Batman, But this movie has undeniable cinematic style. And speaking of Catwoman, oh my gosh, watching this movie again, Michelle Pfeiffer as Selina Kyle is just fantastic. And hear me say, Selina Kyle. I think her Catwoman's great, but I think a lot of actresses could kind of do the sultry, sexy whatever thing that this type of character is. But Selina Kyle is so psychologically complex. She is a tragic character. And when you see Michelle Pfeiffer, laughing and crying at the same time, or, the way that she can just access emotions and bring tears to her eyes, when there's layers of emotions, there's conflicting emotions being displayed at once. It just makes her just riveting for me to watch throughout the entire movie. So, for Michelle Pfeiffer's performance alone, Batman Returns is worth going back to, and it's got a whole lot of Christmas goodness to boot. Next up, Farscape Season 4. Farscape being my favorite TV show of all time, if you didn't know that. But the episode Terra Firma. And this was, Season 4 was the show's last season, then it was capped off with a miniseries a year after that. But so they're kind of bringing a lot of things to a climax for the whole series at this point. And this was the first time that John Crichton and company went back to Earth, for realsies. And it was during Christmas time. At first I thought the episode, they were just kind of doing Christmas outside of season, but it does become clearer to me as you go into the episode. No, it actually is actual Christmas as they get back to Earth here. And John's family kind of leans into really celebrating the holiday and doing a bunch of traditions, trying to create a sense of normalcy. And I think that there's an interesting parallel there for people that just go through major life changes and then find a sense of security and warmth and normalcy through different Christmas traditions. I think that's why that Christmas can be kind of a difficult thing to go through after certain experiences in life, can also be a healing thing to go through after certain experiences in life. And so, and John, if you follow his journey, he really gets messed up. He really gets seriously messed up. And so all the more it really kind of parallels, I think, that phenomenon in the real world. This episode is not for new viewers. At all. You got to watch this show in order. It's one of the reasons why I think at the time it came out, it ultimately failed to really get as big an audience as it could, because it really demanded that you watch it all the way through. But no, it reminds me of, as I watch it as a fan, familiar with the characters in the show, it reminds me of the developing relationship between John Crichton and Aaron Soon, and it's a great way, I think, to revisit the characters and be reminded of who they are as they react in different ways to Earth culture. And it also parallels how Christmas gatherings can bring a combination of fond memories and fresh conflict between family members. So anyway, yeah, I don't watch this one every year. In fact, I took 2 years off at least from watching this one, but I watched it again this year and enjoyed it so much that it actually got me to restart a full watch through of the entire series, which I wouldn't be surprised if I really go the distance on. So yeah, Farscape Season 4, Terra Firma. Next up, Justice League, the animated series, Season 2, the episode Comfort and Joy. This almost has an anthology of stories. It's kind of bouncing around between different members of the Justice League. You've got Green Lantern and Hawkwoman, or are they calling her Hawk Girl in the show? I can't remember. But anyway, it's more about their developing romance that was already kind of a thing that was getting into motion in the show at this point. That really didn't interest me, that whole subplot. But the other subplots really did. You know, Flash is trying to help these kids at this orphanage get this really coveted toy, and he ends up in the mix with the villain Ultra Humanite, and really that story ends with showing a sweetness and a hidden pain seemingly beneath Ultra Humanite's exterior that I find really moving when I see kind of hints of it in this episode. I also I have to say, the main storyline that I really like following is Martian Manhunter going back to the Kent farm with Clark and his parents. I dislike how they portray Superman in this episode. Superman is meant to be good and pure and noble, but they kind of like equate pureness, at least in this episode, pureness and goodness with naivete. They suggest that Superman actually literally still believes in Santa Claus, and I'm not into that, you know. And there's also just a little bit of selfishness in his character too, where he's like trying to use X-ray vision to see inside the presents, but he kind of like mutters to himself, lead, like they coated it in lead. And so I think that the writers were kind of swapping out goodness and pureness with being childish. And I don't think that's an appropriate choice to make with Superman, and it kind of makes him kind of the ridiculous character that a lot of people think that he is. Let's see here. But Martian Manhunter's story closely linked with the stuff going on the Kent farm, and that is always what I tune in for. I watch this episode without fail every year. Martian Manhunter is the lonely outsider in this story, and it really, I think, mirrors those who have a hard time with Christmas because of who they have lost. They don't get super explicit in the animated series. I think they kind of almost symbolically or very briefly allude to what happened to Martian Manhunter's family. But as a long-time, virtually lifelong comic book fan, I know that they were lost in a horrible fire on Mars. And he had like a wife and at least one child, I think a daughter, and he lost them both to this horrible, tragic event. Patron Spider Dan pointed out to me that Martian Manhunter doesn't truly come out of his melancholy in this episode until he overhears a church congregation singing "It Came Upon the Midnight Clear." And they're just singing the first verse, you know, which I think a lot of first verses of carols can go in one ear and out the other. I don't think they're, you know, implying that the Christian message specifically of Christmas was what had an impact on John Jones and bringing him out of that kind of deep melancholy and isolation from others. But, you know, as believers, we can bring that headcanon in if we want. There's nothing stopping us from doing that. And it reminds me that Christmas brings many often natural opportunities for both Christians and non-Christians to reflect on or talk about who Jesus is, what he did to bring, to accomplish peace on earth between God and those who trust in Jesus. You know, we can especially also talk about the hope, the future hope that provides us. And it actually would be very logical if that message that's briefly alluded to in the first verse of "It Came Upon the Midnight Clear" was what gave Martian Manhunter a sense of hope as he thought about the tragic loss of his family and not being able to connect with his current circumstances because of that. Maybe, you know, we could believe that he found hope in that message, that he knows something about the origins of Christmas, you know. Now, of course, we have to set aside the fact that he's Martian and that, okay, would Jesus have died for Martians? Well, that's kind of getting into a kind of a silly conversation, I think. But as Martian Manhunter is a stand-in for humans that have a particular parallel type of experience, I think there is hope to be found as we contemplate the loss that we've experienced, the disappointment that we have with our lives in various ways. There is great hope to be found in the message of what Jesus came to do when he lived as one of us. Either way, though, knowing that Martian Manhunter, tragically lost his family to death in a fire, and that he rarely relaxes into his fully natural Martian form. The form he's normally in with the blue cape and stuff like that, that's a halfway step to fit in with the superhero community, but it's not totally relaxed into his elongated head Martian form, And so for him to be relaxing, seeing in the last scene, relaxing into that, while staring out the window wistfully and singing a strange but haunting, probably Martian melody of some kind. I mean, that makes me well up with tears every time I see it, And just get the sense that, like, there's some kind of catharsis, some kind of healing that Martian Manhunter experienced in that moment. Anyway, so that is, again, Justice League, the animated series, Season 2, the episode Comfort and Joy. Next up, Iron Man 3. The Iron Man movies are among my favorites of the MCU anything. And this one is noticeably set during the Christmas season. That's the setting that's used. There's Christmas lights around, there's snow and stuff like that. There's even I think like a bluesy version of Jingle Bells is playing when Tony is experimenting with his armor near the beginning. So there's different things like that coded throughout this movie that definitely make it very Christmassy, although Christmas isn't part of the theme. There's no Christmas message associated with the character's arc that I recall, but it's still a really enjoyable movie for me, and it's got a lot of Christmas layered into it. It does have kind of amped up humor compared to previous entries, but it also has an amped up grimness to balance it because Tony is dealing with PTSD from his experience in the Avengers movie, and just like reconciling the fact that, oh my gosh, aliens exist. I was almost killed by aliens and stuff. I still have mixed feelings about where they go with the Mandarin character and quote-unquote Trevor. I would have preferred a more traditional villain and for magic to actually come into the picture. I think the MCU's at the point now where we see that they could have, if they wanted to, introduced magic with Iron Man 3. I don't think it would have been too early, and I wish they would have. But I think Iron Man 3 is still better for my money than most Marvel movies, and it's got a ton of Christmas all over the setting. I think the one downside of revisiting it is it's very entrenched in the continuity of the time. It's very much in the wake of the Avengers, and so you might feel a little bit like, oh, should I have watched Avengers just to get a running start at this movie? But if you've seen these movies enough, I think you can put yourself in that headspace. Oh yeah, this is right after the first Avengers movie. I'm ready to go, and still enjoy Iron Man 3 and all the Christmassy goodness of it. And then finally on my list, this one, a little bit more predictable, a little bit more of a standard selection, but I think it does have geek elements, arguably, and that's Scrooged. Does it have geek elements? Well, does Christmas magic count? Christmas magic like Santa Claus and stuff like that. I did see, by the way, Violent Night. In fact, that should be on my honorable mentions at the beginning. I forgot to mention that. But that has like some Christmas magic kind of stuff going on where Santa Claus is a real being with some magical powers and stuff. So I think there's some kind of geekness to that. Does that really count as actual true geek fantasy, or is it just like standard everybody fantasy because everybody, accepts Christmas magic? I don't know. But I think that the production elements of Scrooged with ghosts that, look like zombies and they go into a darker place supernaturally than some other Christmas type movies, I think that kind of edges it into geek territory enough for me to at least put it on this list. But admittedly, it arguably maybe wouldn't belong here. But it's got so many things about it I enjoy that I ended up putting it on here anyway. This is, of course, Robert Zemeckis, a modern, 80s modern reimagining, or was it early 90s? Anyway, reimagining of the Christmas Carol story, centered on a cold and selfish TV executive played by Bill Murray, and Carol Kane, who plays the ghost of Christmas Present, were funnier to me than ever when I watched this last year. I haven't watched it again this year, and I want to. But it's also got that same classic message of selflessness. It doesn't, much like the Christmas Carol movies that I've seen that are actually an adaptation of the original work. They're not bringing in a strong message of Christ actually into Christmas. It's the same general message of selflessness, but it's still classic, and it still has some beauty to it. And actually, I found this version of this classic tale more moving to me than a number of others that are much more adaptations of the original source material. There are a few jokes in Scrooge that I think are dated, but most of them really do feel timeless. There are nice effects that do their job fairly well, especially the practical effects throughout the movie. These retellings of A Christmas Carol in various forms we've seen them in can easily be overly sweet and just kind of empty, but this one is genuinely moving to me, in addition to being shocking and darkly funny at times. So anyway, that's my list. What geek movies or shows, if any, are kind of part of your Christmas tradition that you maybe come back to year after year? I'd love to hear what those are in the comments. But that is all that I have for now. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye. For more chat about geek entertainment, answers to your questions, and news from the wider world of Christian geekery, get the Christian Geek Central podcast today on iTunes and other podcast services.